You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
And now, here's your host, Chris Voss. Wait, is that me? Oh, I thought I was the announcer guy this week. Hey, guys, thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you. Welcome, my friends, and all to the Chris Voss Show family podcast. It's actually the Chris Voss Show podcast, but remember, we think of it as a family where, we love you, but we don't judge you. So we're the best kind of family there is. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We certainly appreciate it. You know the drill. Refer the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives. Get them to go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. Nice. Just ask them nicely. Use the word please if you would. And tell them to subscribe. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, where you can see my book and all the other books we read and review over there. Also go to all of our groups, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all those crazy places those kids play on the interwebs. Go to our LinkedIn newsletter. It's always fun to see. That thing is growing like a monster. And our big 131,000 group on LinkedIn. Today we have an amazing author on the show, and of course I don't know why. We just every day we have one to two amazing authors on the show, which is pretty amazing. If I can use the word amazing any more times this morning, I'm going to get banned. Anyway, guys, we have on the show with us, Tom Clavin is on the show with us. He's the author of a new book, To the Utmost Ends of the Earth, the epic hunt for the South's most feared ship and the greatest sea battle of the Civil War. He's written a numerous number of books, and I believe the co-author on this is Phil Keith, if you're searching for it. He is the number one best-selling author of The Heart of Everything That Is, Lucky 666, Halsey's Typhoon, Last Men Out, and The Last Stand of Fox Company, which won the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation General Wallace M. Green Jr. Award. He lives in Manasquan, New Jersey, and Sag Harbor, New York, respectively. And I think I left Bob Drury out of this, didn't I?
Yeah, mention Bob, please. He'll come after me.
There you go. So now, okay, I'm confused on one point because I'm looking at the Amazon and it says Phil Keith. What happened there?
Well, yeah, Bob Drury and I have done the Blood and Treasure, which just came out in paperback.
Oh, okay.
That's the seventh book that Bob Drury and I have done together, and in between, Phil Keith, was a good friend of mine for years, and he and I did a book in 2019 called All Blood Runs Red, about the African American aviator fighter pilot Eugene Bullard. And the book was very well received, and it was just supposed to be a one-off for Phil and I. That was, we got a hold of this story, we worked on it together. Wasn't like I didn't have other things to do, but it was so well received that the publisher said, could you guys do one more? So it was a little delicate because I had my own solo books. I was actively, involved with Bob Drury projects very happily. But we had this story we really wanted to tell, and Phil, having been was a retired Navy captain, the idea of doing a story that was about two Navy ships, a Confederate Navy ship and a Union Navy ship, meeting in a battle in the Atlantic was irresistible. So that's how we sort of squeezed in one more before, I had to go back and my other responsibilities. So it can get a little confusing because, I'm usually associated with Bob Drury, but at the same time, it's my second book with Phil Keith, and both collaborations have been very happy ones. I mean, the unhappy part about the one with Phil Keith is that we had turned in the manuscript, the final manuscript, and a few weeks later, Phil passed away. So that was kind of a sad aspect of that collaboration.
Oh, wow. So are we going to be talking about Blood and Treasure then today? It looks like what I've gotten is I pulled your latest book, the Uttermost one that I referenced at the beginning
that's
there.
coming out April 12th. But I'm overjoyed to talk about Blood and Treasure if you care to.
Let's do that too. And Blood and Treasure just came out on paperback March 15th, 2022, which is why I'm getting the thing for it. So there you go. Let's cover that. Blood and Treasure. Yeah. And you can pick it up and order that in books wherever they're fine sold. This originally came out in April 20th, 2021, I think.
In hardcover, yes.
Hardcover.
Pardon me. And St. Martin's Press published it in hardcover in April 2020. And we were, Bob Drury and I really liked the way the book turned out. It turned out it was a different book from when we first started the book. And we thought that it might find an audience, it might find a good audience, but nobody was more surprised when we were. After the book was on sale for only a week, our editor called us up and said, "You guys made the New York Times list."
Awesome.
And, that's very pleasing when you look at it, and you certainly know this from all the authors who you interview, how many books get published every week, 52 weeks a year, that are vying for attention, that are vying for readers' dollars, consumer dollars. And to have our book make that list, which is only was totally amazing, and it stuck around for a couple of weeks. Okay, we're grateful for everything, and then it continued. People continued to find it during the year, and then March 15, they put out the trade paperback edition, as you mentioned, and after only 5 days on sale, yesterday it made its debut on the paperback New York Times nonfiction list at number 15, and next Sunday it'll be number 11. Wow. So we continue to be stunned that this story that mostly takes place in the 1700s is finding a pretty sizable contemporary audience.
That's pretty awesome. It says here too, the author's finest work to date from the Wall Street Journal. So there you go. Rave reviews.
It has gotten great reviews, and we're particularly grateful for the Wall Street Journal review, which was done by a fellow named Peter Cozzens. And if you haven't had Peter on your show, he's a wonderful writer and researcher, and he's a specialist. I shouldn't say specialist. He's just especially knowledgeable about American Indian affairs and events and history. And he did a book a few years ago called "The Earth is Weeping" that got all kinds of awards. It's an absolutely terrific book. And so to have somebody of his caliber write not only in a venue as well known as the Wall Street Journal, but to say it's his finest work yet, we were so pleased and grateful. Of course, we did realize that there's only downhill to go from here.
Well, that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. We're talking about the pre-show, and you have an extraordinary array of books. You want to tell me, everybody, roughly the amount you're up to?
Well, I claim the number 18, and not only do I like the number 18, it's a lucky number. I'm not vouching for its accuracy, but I think 18 is a good number because it's quite a few books that people might say, "Oh, okay, he's done some good books," but it's not too many books, I don't think, that because you get to the certain point where people think, well, they will refer to you as prolific, and a lot of times people don't mean that in a negative way, but sometimes it can be construed as prolific means, well, he works steadily, he comes out with books regularly. They can't be very good if there's not long intervals between books where I was supposed to agonize and have writer's block and suffer for my art. Thankfully, I don't suffer. I enjoy what I do. It's the only thing I know how to do, so I just keep doing it.
Art sometimes makes for the best suffrage, or vice versa. The best suffrage makes for the best art. Ask any musician, I suppose, or artist. Yeah. This is why I'm quoting two different books. You've got paperback coming out, and then you've got the new hardcover coming out and stuff. We actually have a lot of authors that return now about every 6 months. They're pretty prolific, using your word.
Yeah.
And they put out great books, and we've had some authors on 3 or 4 times now, and they just schedule every 6 months to 9 months. Yeah. And hey, back again.
Some authors are just like that. They work steadily, but I also wonder a little bit of this from personal experience. But you had 2 years of a pandemic where obviously that disrupted the lives and occupations of a lot of people, and it was certainly not for the better. But when it comes to authors, and I certainly see, I'm already socially distant. And I work alone in my home office. I don't go out much. And so the pandemic was gave me cover.
Oh yeah.
For that 2 years of the pandemic, I was actually might have been viewed by some generous people as a normal person. But now the pandemic is ending and people are going out again and being social again. My cover's been blown, and I'm back to being the outlier.
Well, I mean, hey, when you do what you do it your best. And I don't know, the longer I live, the more I like the more I get to know people, and the longer I live, the more I like dogs.
Yeah.
So, there's kind of a weird world going on out there still. That COVID's still running around, and then
Yes.
World War III and a few other things. So, and if you've seen some of the people in this country, I don't know, I don't. There's some weird people. I saw some interviews at a rally the other day, and it was quite extraordinary, the interviews that were going on. I'm like, are these people for real? Like, did they make this up something as they go? I'm like, well, what are they on? Because I don't know. Maybe I should be on what they're on. Anyway, I don't know what any of that means. Well, let's get to this book. So the title. Let's start with the title, "Blood and Treasure," and this is a historical thing about Daniel Boone. What made you land on that title?
Well, I was especially glad for the way you asked that question, and here's the reason why. Bob Drury and I had done a book several years ago called "The Heart of Everything That Is," where the central character was the Sioux Indian leader Red Cloud. It took place mostly in the 1850s to 1870s. It was about what was called Red Cloud's War, the only war that a Native American leader won against the U.S. government. And I know some people are going to say, well, what about Sitting Bull and Little Bighorn? Well, that was a battle. I'm talking about an entire war where the U.S. government sued for peace. And it was mostly the last 20 years of the Indian tribes on the plains, freedom that they had before they were basically forced onto reservations. By 1870, they all had to be on reservations or faced arrest or worse.
Mm-hmm.
So to our surprise, the book was very successful. And then we had some other books in between, but I always wanted to come back to the story and say, okay, that was sort of like the end of the Indian Wars. I'd like to go back earlier in time. How did it get started? How did we first crawl across the mountains and enter what became known as the West, and what became the frontier for us? I mean, we had the 13 colonies, but we had the frontier on the other side of the Adirondacks and the Allegheny Mountains. How did that happen? And especially from the point of view of the many of the Indian tribes who are encountering European people for the very first time. And so we started to work on that story. We wanted, and our main character initially was going to be the Shawnee Indian leader Tecumseh. And then we talked about Peter Cousins before. We found out Peter Cousins was working on a book about Tecumseh and his brother. We said, okay, well, we can't do that, because he's got it. He has staked out that territory. We can't compete with him. And so we were casting about for another character, and we started thinking about Daniel Boone, and we thought, well, wait a minute, will Daniel Boone work? Because everybody knows who Daniel Boone is. So we sort of asked a couple of questions of people we knew. What do you know about Daniel Boone? Oh yeah, he died at the Alamo. Or what about Daniel Boone? Oh, he wore coonskin caps. Or his best friend was Mingo, this Indian that was played by Ed Ames of the Ames singing group, all this kind of stuff. Daniel Boone is a character, an American figure who is instant name recognition, and most people really don't know who Daniel Boone really was and how important he was to American history. So that's why Daniel Boone was sort of like a late addition to the story. We were already researching the events that transpired on the American frontier in the 1760s and 1770s and 1780s. But then when we found Daniel Boone, he was everywhere in the story. He grew up on the Western frontier. He knew Indians when he was growing up. He learned from them. He admired them. He respected them. He traveled. He hunted with them. He was also part of the French and Indian War. He played a pivotal role in the American Revolution. There's all these aspects of and the exciting action figure that he was. And he never wore a coonskin cap. And no, he did not die at the Alamo. That was Davy Crockett. So we started to find in Daniel Boone this wonderful character that you think you know and you don't.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting the power of Disney to be able to lay down a character. Yeah,
it's all Fess Parker's fault. It's all Fess Parker's fault because when he did the Disney movie back in the 50s. Some people of a certain age may have recall seeing it. That was a Davy Crockett movie. That was quite successful. And then they did a Disney produced weekly television show, Daniel Boone, in which Fess Parker also played Daniel Boone. So that's why for some people, especially those of a certain age, there's a lot of mixing up between the two. They're all the same person, Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone.
Yeah, that explains a lot, because I grew up seeing those movies, and I was like, I want to be like Daniel Boone. I grew up, I want like Coonskin Hat. And then I remember watching the Alamo, and then of course we've had some authors who've done the historical research in the Alamo, and that's a whole other thing now.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it's one of my most hated videos on it really riled up the Texans to find out that the story of that whole thing is different. So let's talk more about what picture, what story is told in here. What can we tease out about the book that will entice readers to pick it up?
Well, if I was going to pick, Daniel Boone has had very little representation other than the Fess Parker Disney stuff early, many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Has had very little representation on screen. I mean, there's been no Daniel Boone limited series.
Mm-hmm.
The closest, really, that the portrayal of Daniel Boone on screen would have been by Daniel Day-Lewis in the film Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, yeah.
Which came out about 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And because that was Daniel Boone. It wasn't called Daniel Boone in the movie. But there's one adventure in the Daniel Boone story that's in our book, which is one of his most remarkable adventures. In 1776, his daughter and two of her friends, they were all about 14, 15 years old, are kidnapped by Indians. And usually when you have white children kidnapped by Indians, they're not found again. I'm not saying necessarily that they're killed, but they're adopted into the tribe.
Oh, wow.
The tribes at that time and going into the 1800s, they had a really severe population problem. Partly it was because of warring with each other, and part of it was because they had no immunity to diseases they picked up from the white man, especially smallpox.
Oh, wow.
So they would adopt kidnapped adolescents and teenagers into their tribe so that they could replenish the numbers of them. And Daniel Boone's daughter would have ended up bearing as many children as possible. But Boone set off, and took him days, but he tracked these Indians down, and his daughter would tear off little pieces of her dress and leave them stuck to bushes and stuff as she was being hauled along. And her father was following this trail she was leaving. And eventually he found them and rescued his daughter, Jemima, and these two other girls. And that became a story that years later, James Fenimore Cooper used in The Last of the Mohicans.
Oh, wow.
So that's just one of the exciting stories in the book. I don't want people to think Blood and Treasure, okay, it's kind of an historical thing in which we're just talking about a lot of statistics about Indian tribes and expeditions and stuff. There's a lot of action in the book, and I think people would be very pleasantly surprised, if they like action, to find out what an action figure Daniel Boone was. He was everywhere on the frontier, it seemed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So, I mean, did you get a chance to interview him? No, sorry. I'm the comedian around here.
He
so
died just before we started working on the book. If we had been 5 years earlier, or maybe 2 centuries, either way.
Was a lot of this stuff well documented? Was it easy to find, or did you have to do a lot of digging? I imagine that takes some work.
It was one of the things that was a great surprise to us. I mean, so many things surprising about this book, but one is this: Daniel Boone, thankfully, while he was still alive, and he had a long life. I mean, he was in his 86th year when he died, at a time when the average lifespan of an American male was probably 45, maybe 50 tops, and he lived to be almost 86. And towards the end of his life, he was kind of a living legend, and there were a couple of people who came to interview him, and he liked to tell some stories in his old age, surrounded by his grandchildren. But there was, not long after he died, a man came along named Lyman Draper, and Lyman Draper decided he was going to dedicate himself to writing this massive, authoritative, definitive biography of Daniel Boone.
Mm-hmm.
And so he spent years and probably put about 50,000 miles on horseback, traveling all over the country, all over Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, places like that. Anybody who was still alive that knew Daniel Boone, including a couple of his surviving children, he interviewed them, collected thousands of pages of documents, and then he sat down to write his biography. And he got about a third of the way through it and developed writer's block. The poor man, I know we can laugh now because he's long dead. But the poor man,
like he had it coming or something. Wow. Okay.
I think what probably happened is he accumulated so much information, and it was so daunting. It was this mountain that he just couldn't climb. So Unfortunately for Lyman Draper, he did not get to write his magnum opus of Daniel Boone. Fortunately for the rest of us, he became, of all things, the executive director of the Wisconsin Historical Society, to which he donated all his papers, thousands and thousands of documents about Daniel Boone. So, surprisingly, the biggest repository of information about Daniel Boone is not in Kentucky, not in Tennessee, not on the East Coast at all, but it is in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
And it is again, thousands of pages of documents of people who knew Boone, interviews with his children, surviving children. And so to be able to tap into that was very, very fortunate for us. I mean, of course, it's available to anybody who wants to do it, but I think there's been not that many people have come along in the recent decades who wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm. What are some other things that we're missing here? You guys talk about what were some stories that maybe stuck out that you think people are going to like hearing about?
I think one of the remarkable things about Daniel Boone is his relationship with Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
He came of age at a time when it was routine for people to refer to them pretty commonly as savages. And there were a lot of people at the time who didn't, even somebody as so enlightened, so to speak, as Thomas Jefferson, believed the only solution to the Indian problem was to exterminate them.
Mm-hmm.
And Boone respected and admired Indians. He formed lifelong friendships with them. When he was out, his favorite place to be was out in the wilderness, where he lived and dressed like an Indian on these long hunts that he went on. Mm-hmm. He was quoted as saying that sometimes I'm not sure where I am, but I've never been lost. His comfortable element was being out in this vast forest land. When he went through the Cumberland Gap, he was like, there was no one else around. He went through the Cumberland Gap and founded Kentucky, basically. As far as the white man version of founding Kentucky, there were plenty of people already living there. They just weren't white people. So I think his long hunts, his family relationships we found fascinating. He and his wife Rebecca were married for 56 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great story that also involves his daughter Jemima, which is also characteristic of what the kind of man Daniel Boone was. He would go on these long hunts. And like I said, they would last for 6 months, 8 months, a year, sometimes a year and a half. And on one of these long hunts, he was gone for something like 16 months. And word had filtered back to where his wife and his younger children were living, which I think was in Western North Carolina, that he had died.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he finally did make his way back and showed up in the town where his wife was living, the frontier town, he walks into his cabin and there's his wife with a baby.
Oh.
And so he the baby's like a couple of months old. He does the math. He's been away for about 16 months. He wasn't a well-educated man, but he could do basic arithmetic. And he's like, "Hi, hon, what's up?" And she's astonished that he's alive. "I thought you were dead." And what happened? And so she said, "I thought you were dead, and I got to, I turned to comfort for your brother Ned."
Oh,
and his younger brother Ned, who looked very much like Daniel. They were almost twins. They were only separated by a couple of years. And Ned was going to take care of me and your children, because it was to be a widow on the frontier with children would be a tough place. And so this is Ned's baby.
Way to go, Ned.
But Boone pondered this for a bit, and then he said his base was, "Well, at least you kept it in the family." And
wow.
He and Rebecca immediately got back together. They loved each other dearly, and they had more children after that. And interestingly, Jemima became very close. Daniel Boone raised her as his daughter, and Jemima, again, she's the one he rescued from the Indians. And at the very end of his life, it was with Jemima and her husband and children that Daniel Boone lived.
Wow. That's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
That happened to me and my wife, but I had just gone to the store for a couple hours. I came home and there was a guy here. So I don't know what that means.
Life on the frontier.
Just joking. That's what she said. It's life on the frontier.
I thought you were dead, she said. You've been gone.
I thought you were dead. I was like, I was at Walmart. No, I'm just kidding. So there you go. Well, this sounds like a very interesting book, exciting book, and people are just excited to read it. So very good. Give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs and get to know you better in this. And
I'm really well hidden. It's tomclaven.com. That's a very complicated TOMCLAVIN.com. And again, I want to mention to people that it's really an adventure story. There is a lot of research that went into it, and because we wanted to get the story right. I think we'd be doing a great disservice to Daniel Boone. Some of the other amazing characters in there, like the frontiersmen, like Simon Kenton and Daniel Morgan, who became a Revolutionary War hero. Some of the Indian leaders, the Cornstalk. There's even a story in the book, which is again true, that at one point Daniel Boone himself was kidnapped by the Shawnee, and he was adopted into the tribe. His father became Blackfish, was the name of his father.
Mm-hmm.
And he lived as Blackfish's son for quite a while, as an adopted Shawnee tribesman. And when he eventually came back, the only reason why he left, I shouldn't say the only reason, but an important reason why he left is because he found out that the Shawnee were about to attack this fort.
Yeah.
And so he escaped, and it took him like a couple of 2-3 weeks of running through the woods, zillions of miles through the woods, to get to the fort just in time to warn them that they were about to be attacked by this overwhelming Shawnee force. So it's really kind of an adventure story, and Daniel Boone's an action figure, but at the same time, you could have the comfort of knowing that a lot of research went into it. And it's not just, we didn't know how this happened, we just made something up. Everything is based on factual information.
That's pretty amazing. Did he ever leave the house after the wife thing? Because I'd be afraid to leave the house. Like you're gone for another, I don't know, month or something, and all of a sudden you come back and she's like, "I married your other brother."
Yeah, he did have several brothers, so there was that possibility that happened. But he had to. I mean, it wasn't like he said, "Honey, I'm not going to go out in the woods anymore. I'm going to get a job at the bowling alley."
It's hilarious.
It was called making a living.
There you go. I know some husbands who do leave and fake their death for obvious reasons. Yeah. It sounds like that. It sounds starting to sound like that. What was that Disney movie, Seven Brothers and Seven Wives? Anyway, we do the jokes around here. Anyway, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Tom. This is really insightful. It's been wonderful to have you, and we love to talk about all your books as you pump them out. So please come back for more. To my audience, thanks for tuning in. Go order the book up. You can get it now just out on paperback. Blood and Treasure, Daniel Boone and the Fight for America's First Frontier. And you can order that baby up and all the other books. Go see all of Tom's other books out there on the marketplace there. Thanks for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss. All our groups on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and all those wonderful places. Thank you very much for tuning in. And be sure to be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.